Rain hammered against the roof of the black cab, turning Chicago's downtown into a blurred kaleidoscope of neon blue and bleeding red. It was the kind of downpour that washed the streets clean but forced the city's secrets into the backseat of moving cars. Monique Jackson gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles matching the rich coffee tone of her skin. The anatomy textbook on the passenger seat was closed, but the terms were still swimming in her head. The shift had stretched into the early hours of the morning, long past the time decent people were asleep. Monique navigated the slick asphalt, her eyes scanning for potholes and police cruisers. She knew this city's grid better than she knew the back of her own hand. She knew which intersections had cameras, which hotels had doormen who tipped, and how to disappear into traffic when a passenger got too rowdy. But tonight, she just needed to make quota and get home. She took the turn onto Wacker Drive, a route she usually avoided this late. Too many shadows. Too much isolation. But her tuition payment was due in 48 hours, and she needed every mile. That's when the silence in the backseat shifted from peaceful to heavy. "Sir," she called out, her voice tight, echoing in the confined space. "We're 5 minutes out." Monique's heart stuttered. She glanced into the rearview mirror, expecting to see a drunk businessman sleeping off a bender. Instead, slumped against the cold leather, was a nightmare. He was wearing a suit that cost more than her entire medical school debt, a sleek black leather jacket over a crisp white shirt. But the image of power was shattered. The white fabric was ruined, soaked heavy and dark with fresh blood. His head was tilted to the side, his sharp, chiseled features pale as moonlight. A bold tattoo wound up the side of his neck, jagged ink disappearing into his hairline. Monique saw it all in a single, terrifying second. The tailored cut of the clothes. The specific, tribal design of the ink. The gun printing against the inside of his jacket. This wasn't a passenger. This was a war zone. This was Tae-Joon Lee, a man whose name was whispered in the news with fear, a man who represented the kind of violence that swallowed civilians whole. "Pull over and run," her street instinct screamed. Her hand hovered over the door handle. Every lesson she'd learned driving in Chicago told her to bail, to leave the car and disappear before the people who did this came back to finish the job. But then, she saw the rise and fall of his chest. It was shallow, erratic. Monique turned in her seat, the medical student in her overriding the cab driver. She looked at the wound. The blood wasn't just dripping, it was pulsing. Arterial. He was hypovolemic. He was dying. "Sir," Monique shouted, louder now.
"Urgent."
"You're bleeding out." The man's eyes fluttered open. Ice blue contacts, piercing and unnatural, stared back at her through the pain. He looked at Monique, and she saw something she didn't expect from a monster. Not anger, not command, but a terrifying clarity. "No," he rasped, blood bubbling past his lips.
"No hospitals."
"The vipers, they're waiting." Monique's mind raced. Every survival instinct she'd honed over years of poverty, every warning from the medical board that had already expelled her once, screamed at her to open the door and run. To let the streets take him. But she looked at the blood. She looked at the desperation in a powerful man's eyes. And then she remembered the anatomy textbook on the seat beside her. She remembered the oath she had taken in her heart, even if they had taken her license. Monique Jackson made a choice that would destroy her quiet life and bind her to a criminal empire forever. What follows is a story of adrenaline and intimacy, of a healer and a killer trapped in a steel cage, and a shocking biological twist that defies 1,000,000,000 odds. If you want to see how a disgraced medical student turns a getaway car into an operating room, and why the blood in her veins is the only thing keeping a Mafia king alive, hit subscribe right now. You're going to want to see how this ends. The rain in Chicago didn't wash things clean. It just made the dirt shine. Monique Jackson drove her black cab through the slick streets, her eyes tired, but her mind sharp. She wasn't just a driver. In her head, she was already a surgeon. Hypovolemia, she whispered to herself, practicing for the exams she couldn't afford to take yet. Low blood volume. Symptoms: rapid heart rate, pale skin. In the back seat, a drunk man laughed loudly at a joke on his phone. Monique ignored him. She focused on the rhythm of the windshield wipers. Swish, swish. It sounded like a heartbeat. She needed this money. Her rent was late, and her tuition for medical school was impossible. Every mile she drove was a step closer to her dream, but tonight, the dream felt very far away. She dropped the man off at a fancy hotel. He didn't tip. Monique sighed, gripping the steering wheel. Just 2 more hours, she told herself. She opened her thick anatomy book on the passenger seat, stealing a quick look at a diagram of the human heart. It was perfect and complicated, unlike her life. Then, a hand slammed against her window. The man who got in was different. He didn't smell like cheap beer or expensive cologne. He smelled like copper and rain. He wore a long black coat that looked heavy, and his face was pale, like moonlight on snow. He was handsome, but his eyes were full of pain. "Drive," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel. Monique looked in the rear-view mirror. "Where to?" "Just drive," he snapped. He reached into his coat with a shaking hand and pulled out a thick stack of cash. It was more money than Monique made in a year. 20,000, he rasped. "No questions. No stops." Monique's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't a normal fare. She saw a dark stain spreading on his white shirt. It was red.
Blood.
"Sir, you're hurt," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I should take you to Mercy Hospital." "No," he shouted, then winced, clutching his side.
No hospitals.
"If you go there, I'm dead. Just drive the car." The fear in his eyes was real. It wasn't just pain. He was running from something much worse than a wound. Monique hesitated, her foot hovering over the gas pedal. The car moved smoothly through the city, but the passenger was fading fast. In the mirror, Monique saw his head drop back against the leather seat. His breathing was shallow and fast. "Sir," she called out. No answer. "Hey!" she shouted. The man slumped sideways. He wasn't just sleeping. He was crashing. Monique knew the signs. Hypovolemic shock. His body was shutting down because he didn't have enough blood. She cursed under her breath and swerved the cab into a deserted alleyway behind an old warehouse. She didn't care about the $20,000 anymore. She couldn't let him die in her back seat. She jumped out and ripped open the back door. The rain soaked her instantly. She grabbed his wrist to check for a pulse. It was weak and thready. As she rolled up his sleeve to find a vein, a silver medical bracelet slid down his arm. It flashed in the dim streetlight. Monique froze. The engraving was clear and terrifying. Warning: Rh null blood type. Do not transfuse without match. Her stomach dropped. Rh null. Golden blood. It was the rarest blood type in the world. A normal hospital bag would kill him instantly. Monique stared at the bracelet, her mind racing. This was impossible. Less than 50 people on the entire planet had Rh null blood. It was a curse and a miracle wrapped in one. If he needed blood, he could only take it from someone exactly like him. If he got the wrong kind, his body would attack itself, and he would die within minutes. Her hand shook as she reached for her own wallet in the front seat. She pulled out her faded donor card, the one she had carried since she was 16. She knew what was written there, but she had to see it. She had to be sure. Monique Jackson. Blood type. Rh null. The world seemed to stop spinning. The rain, the city noise, the sirens in the distance. Everything went silent. She looked at the dying man, then back at her card. The odds were 1 in a billion. Maybe more. Destiny wasn't just knocking on her door. It was kicking it down. She wasn't just a cab driver tonight. She was the only person in Chicago, maybe the only person in the country, who could keep this stranger alive. There was no time to think. Monique grabbed her emergency medical kit from the trunk. It was old, stolen from her school supplies, but it had the basics. She needed gravity, and she needed a connection. She didn't have a fancy infusion stand. She grabbed a lug wrench from her tire kit and duct taped it to the ceiling handle of the cab. It looked ugly, but it would hold the tube up. She tore open a sterile packet with her teeth, her hands moving fast and sure. This was what she was born to do. "Don't die on me," she whispered. She tied a rubber tourniquet around her own arm, pumping her fist until her vein popped up, blue and strong against her skin. She winced as she slid the needle in. Dark red blood flowed into the clear tube. Then she turned to him. She found the matching vein in his arm, cleaned the skin with an alcohol wipe, and pushed the other needle in. She taped everything down tight. A red line now connected them, darker than the neon lights outside. She wasn't just driving him anymore. She was keeping him alive with her own life. Monique watched the clear plastic tube turn dark red. It was a terrifying sight, yet beautiful in a strange way. Her blood, warm and full of life, was leaving her body and flowing directly into his. There was no machine to pump it, just gravity and the steady beat of her own heart. She taped the tube to the back of the driver's seat to keep it steady. In the back seat, Taejun gasped. It was a sharp, sudden sound, like a drowning man breaking the surface of the water. His eyes snapped open wider this time. He looked down at his arm, then followed the red line up to the ceiling and back down to Monique's arm. Confusion washed over his face, followed instantly by shock. He knew what this meant. He knew the odds. "You," he whispered, his voice gaining a tiny bit of strength. "You are original." "Save your breath," Monique ordered, checking the tape on her arm. "Don't move. If you pull this needle out, you bleed to death, and I wasted a lot of good blood." He stared at her, not as a servant, but as a savior. The connection between them was now physical, undeniable, and keeping him alive. Just as the color began to return to Taejun's cheeks, the alleyway exploded with light. Blinding white beams cut through the rain, illuminating the interior of the cab. Monique squinted, shielding her eyes. 2 black SUVs blocked the exit, their engines growling like angry beasts.
"Vibas," Tion hissed.
He tried to sit up, reaching for his gun, but the movement tugged on the infusion tube. "Stop," Monique yelled. "You'll rip the vein." She didn't think, she reacted. She scrambled into the driver's seat, but her left arm, the one giving blood, was tethered to the back seat. She couldn't extend it to the steering wheel. She was trapped by her own mercy. Men in dark suits stepped out of the SUVs, weapons drawn. They raised their guns. "Stay low," Monique screamed. She jammed the key into the ignition with her right hand. The engine roared to life. She couldn't reach the wheel with her left hand without breaking the connection, so she kept it pinned to her side. She slammed her foot onto the gas pedal, reversing the cab straight back into the darkness, deeper into the alley, just as the first bullets sparked against the hood. Driving a car is usually done with 2 hands. Driving a getaway car while transfusing blood is nearly impossible. Monique grit her teeth, sweat stinging her eyes. She steered with her right hand, her knuckles white, while her left arm hung awkwardly over the center console, protecting the fragile tube. The cab skidded on the wet pavement as she whipped it around a dumpster. The tires screeched in protest. Behind them, the SUVs roared in pursuit, smashing through the wooden crates she had just dodged. "Hard left," Taejun shouted from the back. Monique didn't question him. She yanked the wheel right, spinning the car in a tight circle, then threw it into drive. She used her knee to hold the wheel steady for a split second so she could shift gears. The cab fishtailed, sliding sideways before the tires caught grip. The infusion tube stretched tight, dangerously taut. Monique gasped as the needle shifted slightly under her skin, a sharp, hot pain. But she didn't pull away. She couldn't. She pressed the accelerator to the floor, the engine whining as they shot out of the alley and back onto the main road, leaving the Vipers momentarily stuck in the narrow passage. The chase had slowed down as Monique merged onto the highway, blending in with the heavy truck traffic.
But a new danger was setting in.
The adrenaline was fading, and in its place came a cold, creeping fog. Monique blinked, but the streetlights seemed to have fuzzy halos around them. Her fingertips felt numb, and a dull ache throbbed behind her eyes. She shivered violently. The heater was on, but she felt like she was sitting in a freezer. She was losing too much fluid. Her body was crying out for the blood she was giving away. In the rearview mirror, the change was opposite. Taejun was no longer the pale, dying ghost she had found. His skin had a faint, healthy flush. He was sitting up straighter, his movement sharper. The blood, her blood, was working like a miracle drug. It was surging through his veins, waking up his muscles, and clearing his mind. "Driver," Taejun said, his voice stronger now, commanding. "You are drifting lanes." Monique shook her head, trying to clear the fog.
I'm
okay," she slurred, her words thick. She gripped the wheel tighter, terrified that saving him meant killing herself. Monique pulled the cab into a quiet, shadowed area under an old railway bridge. The rain drummed a steady rhythm on the roof, isolating them from the world. The silence inside the car was heavy, but it wasn't scary anymore. It was personal. She leaned her head back against the seat, too dizzy to move. The tube still pulsed with dark red life, a bridge between the front seat and the back. Taejun leaned forward, his face close to the partition. He looked at the tape on her arm, then up to her eyes in the mirror. The arrogant Mafia boss was gone. In his place was a man who looked humbled. "Why?" he asked quietly. "You could have run. You could have let me die. Why do this for a stranger?" Monique turned her head slowly to look at him. Her vision was swimming, but her answer was steady. She remembered her mother, her studies, and the oath she had memorized. "Because I'm a doctor," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "And tonight, you're my patient. That's the only rule that matters." The black SUVs appeared in the rearview mirror again, growing larger, like sharks closing in on prey. This time, they weren't trying to hide. They flashed their high beams, blinding Monique in the dark cab. "They found us," Monique said, her voice shaking. She was sweating, but her skin felt freezing cold. Taejun turned in his seat, squinting through the rain-streaked back window. The lead SUV got close enough for the streetlights to illuminate the driver. Taejun's face went hard as stone. He recognized the man. He recognized the aggressive way they drove. It wasn't the police, and it wasn't a random gang.
"My uncle," Tion whispered.
The betrayal in his voice was sharper than a knife. He wants the empire. He wants the shipping routes, the money, and the power. But to get them, he has to bury me first. Monique gripped the wheel with her one free hand. "Family?" she asked, disbelief clouding her mind. "In my world," Taejun said, checking the magazine of his gun, "family is just the person closest enough to stab you in the back. Keep driving, doctor. Do not let him win." The city lights began to blur and twist. The red taillights ahead stretched into long, angry lines that looked like laser beams. Monique blinked, trying to clear the fog in her brain, but it wouldn't go away. The loss of blood was playing tricks on her mind. Suddenly, the people walking on the rainy sidewalk changed. They weren't strangers in coats anymore. They wore white lab coats. She saw Dr. Holloway, the dean who had expelled her from medical school. He was standing on the corner, pointing a judging finger at her. "You aren't a doctor," the hallucination whispered in her ear. "You're just a driver. You're a failure." Monique gasped and swerved the cab, nearly hitting a parked car. I didn't do it," she mumbled to the empty air. "Hey, Taejun's voice cut through the nightmare. He leaned forward, his hand gripping her shoulder. His touch was warm and real. Stay with me, Monique. Look at the road. Those ghosts aren't real. I am real. The blood is real. Drive the car. His voice was an anchor, pulling her back from the edge of madness. She shook her head, and the Dean vanished into the rain. Monique turned the wheel, aiming for the State Street Bridge. It was their only way across the river to safety. But as the bridge came into view, her heart sank. 3 black sedans were parked sideways across the road, forming a wall of steel and glass. Men stood behind the cars, their rifles raised and aimed at the cab. It was a trap.
Ram them.
Taejun shouted from the back. Push through. Monique tried. She really did. She told her leg to stomp on the gas pedal, to summon the power of the engine and smash through the blockade. But her body wouldn't listen. Her muscles were weak and trembling. Her vision was tunneling into a dark circle. Instead of speeding up, her foot slipped off the pedal. The cab coasted, slowing down as it rolled toward the wall of enemies. I can't, she whispered, tears mixing with the sweat on her face. I'm too weak. The cab came to a halt 20 feet from the gunmen. They were sitting ducks. Monique slumped over the steering wheel, totally drained. She had given everything she had. The silence in the cab was heavy. Monique was barely conscious, her head resting on the wheel. She had saved him, but now she was helpless. Taejun looked at her, then at the tube connecting their arms. He felt a surge of power in his chest. It was her blood. It was fierce, strong, and full of life. It had brought him back from the dead. Rest now, doctor, he said softly. It is my turn. He didn't gently remove the blood pipe. There was no time. He ripped the tape from his arm and pulled the needle out. A drop of red fell onto the leather seat, but he didn't bleed out. He was stable. He was energized.
He checked his gun one last time.
He had 7 bullets. There were 5 men outside. He liked those odds. He didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked like a predator who had just been fed. He kicked the door open. The rain swirled into the cab, cold and wet, but Taejun didn't feel it. He stepped out onto the asphalt, his coat billowing behind him like a dark cape. Taejun stepped into the glare of the headlights. The men at the barricade hesitated for a split second. They expected a dying man to crawl out. Instead, they got the Dragon of Soul. He moved with terrifying speed. He raised his gun and fired.
Bang! Bang!
2 men dropped instantly. The others scrambled for cover, shouting in panic. They returned fire, bullets sparking off the pavement and pinging against the metal of the cab. But Taejun didn't flinch. He stood in front of the taxi, his body a human shield protecting the woman inside. He moved forward, firing with precise, brutal efficiency. He didn't waste a single shot. He took out the tire of the center car, causing it to sag, then shot the gunman hiding behind it. He was a force of nature, fueled by Monique's sacrifice. Within seconds, the shooting stopped. The blockade was cleared. Smoke drifted in the rain. Taejun stood alone amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving, his gun smoking. He turned back to the cab. He wasn't just guarding a car. He was guarding the most valuable treasure he had ever found. Taejun slid back into the passenger seat, rain dripping from his dark hair onto the leather. He looked stronger, his movement sharp again, but his white shirt was still soaked in a terrifying amount of red. He reached for the clear plastic tube hanging from Monique's arm, his eyes full of concern. Enough, he said firmly, his voice low and commanding. You have given too much, doctor. I can fight now. We stop this. He tried to peel the medical tape from her skin. Monique slapped his hand away. Her vision was blurry, and her head felt like it was floating in deep water, but her voice was hard as stone.
No, she said.
Your color is better, but your blood pressure is still too low. If we stop now, you will crash again, and this time you won't wake up. She grabbed the needle he had pulled from his own arm. Her hands shook violently from exhaustion, but she didn't miss. She jammed it back into his vein and taped it down tight. "I'm the doctor," she whispered, leaning back against the seat, totally drained. "You just drive the gun. I drive the blood." The bright city lights faded behind them as Monique steered the battered cab into the industrial district. Huge brick buildings loomed like sleeping giants in the rain, dark and silent against the night sky. Taejun pointed a shaking finger toward a rusty metal gate at the very end of a dead-end street. "There," he said, breathing heavily. "The laundry plant." Monique didn't ask any questions. She drove straight at the gate. It opened slowly with a groan of metal, revealing a dark courtyard filled with white steam and the strong, chemical smell of bleach. This was a mob front, a place where dirty money and dirty laundry got washed clean. Men in gray uniforms ran out of the shadows, guns raised high. They lowered them instantly when they saw Taejun's face in the window. Monique pulled the car into the bay, the tires squealing on the wet concrete. The engine sputtered and died, finally giving up the ghost. Steam hissed from the radiator, mixing with the fog. They were safe. But as the adrenaline left Monique's body, the reality of what she had done crashed down on her. She wasn't just tired. She was empty. "We are here," Taejun said, unbuckling his seatbelt with a click. He turned to help Monique, expecting her to open the door, but she didn't move. She was staring straight ahead, her knuckles white. "Doctor?" he asked gently. Monique blinked, but her eyes rolled back into her head. The world tilted sideways. She tried to say his name, but no sound came out of her mouth. Her body slumped forward, hitting the horn with a loud, long honk. The noise echoed through the warehouse like a dying scream, startling the birds in the rafters. Taejun shouted, ripping the driver's side door open. He pulled her out, her body limp as a rag doll in his arms. She was heavy, dead weight. He touched her face. She was cold, ice cold. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, searching for a beat. Nothing.
No pulse. No rhythm.
Her heart, which had pumped life into him for the last hour, had nothing left for itself. "Medic!" Taejun screamed, his voice cracking with terror. "Get a medic now. She is dying." A team of men in white coats rushed over, carrying heavy bags and stretchers. They laid Monique on the cold concrete floor. One man ripped open her jacket and pressed a stethoscope to her chest, listening intently. "She's in cardiac arrest," the medic yelled, panic in his voice. "Her heart has stopped. She needs fluids. Get the O-negative blood bag.
Now."
Taejun grabbed the medic by the collar and slammed him against the side of the ambulance. "No," he roared. "She is Rh null. Golden blood. If you give her O-negative, you kill her instantly." The medic froze, his face going pale with fear. "Boss, we don't have Rh null. Nobody does. It doesn't exist in our stock. It's too rare. It's impossible to find." The silence in the warehouse was deafening. Monique lay still, her skin turning blue. She was dying because she had saved him. Taejun looked at his own arm, where the needle mark was still fresh. He looked at the blood drying on his shirt. It wasn't his blood. It was hers. "I have it," Taejun said, realizing the terrible truth. "I am the stock." The medic shook his head frantically, holding up his hands. "Boss, you lost too much already. You are barely standing. If we take it back now, you could go into shock again. It's too dangerous. You could both die right here on the floor." Taejun didn't hesitate for a second. He pulled his gun and pointed it directly at the medic's head. His hand was steady, his eyes cold. "Hook me up," he ordered.
Now.
The medic scrambled to obey. They wheeled a gurney over and laid Taejun right next to Monique. It was a mirror image of the back seat of the cab, only now it was life or death. They inserted a thick needle into Taejun's vein and connected the plastic line to Monique's limp arm. "Pump it," Taejun commanded, tossing his gun aside onto the concrete. "Give it back. Give her everything back." He watched the dark red liquid flow out of him and into her. He felt the cold return. The dizziness hit him like a massive wave, but he smiled. He watched the color slowly return to her cheeks. She had given him her life, without asking. Now he was returning the favor. Darkness wasn't empty, it was full of memories. Monique wasn't in the warehouse anymore. She was back in the dean's office at her medical school. The air smelled like old paper and lies. Dean Holloway stood over her, his face red and angry. He threw a bag of stolen pills onto the desk. "We found these in your locker, Miss Jackson," he shouted. "You are a thief and a junkie." "I didn't take them," Monique screamed in her dream. "Someone planted them. I have the highest grades in the class. Why would I steal?" But nobody listened. She saw the campus police grabbing her arms. She saw the other students watching in silence, whispering as she was dragged out. She felt the shame burning her skin like fire. She saw her mother crying when the letter came. Expelled. License revoked. The dream shifted. She was driving the cab again, but the road was made of quicksand. She was sinking. The dean was in the back seat laughing. "You'll never be a doctor," he sneered. "You're just a driver." Monique tried to breathe, but the black water rushed into her lungs, pulling her down into the deep, cold silence. The first thing Monique noticed was the smell. It didn't smell like bleach, gasoline, or old taxi leather. It smelled like expensive lavender and fresh rain. She opened her eyes. The light was soft and golden. She wasn't on a cold concrete floor. She was lying in a massive bed with sheets made of real silk. They felt like cool water against her skin. A heart monitor beeped steadily next to her, a comforting, rhythmic sound.
Beep, beep, beep.
She tried to sit up, but her body felt heavy, like she had slept for 100 years. She looked at her arm. The dirty duct tape and the lug wrench intravenous infusion were gone. In their place was a professional medical line, neatly taped with clean gauze. Fluids were dripping slowly into her vein. She looked around the room. It was huge, with velvet curtains and marble floors. It looked more like a palace than a hospital room. She touched her chest. Her heart was beating strong and steady. She was alive. The cab, the gunfight, the blood. It felt like a nightmare, but the needle in her arm proved it was all real. The heavy oak door opened without a sound. Taejun walked in. He looked like a completely different person. The blood-soaked shirt and the dirty leather jacket were gone. He wore a dark blue suit that was perfectly tailored to his body. His hair was styled back, neat and sharp. He looked powerful, dangerous, and impossibly wealthy. But when he saw her awake, his face softened. The cold mask of the Mafia boss melted away. He walked to the side of the bed and sat down on a velvet chair. He didn't look at her like she was an employee or a servant. He looked at her like she was a queen. "You are awake," he said softly. His voice was deep and calm. "Where am I?" Monique asked, her voice raspy and dry. "You are in my home," Taejun answered. He poured a glass of water from a crystal pitcher and handed it to her. His fingers brushed against hers, warm and gentle. "You saved me, doctor. You gave me your own life when everyone else wanted me dead. I have never owed a debt this large to anyone." Monique drank the water slowly. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I did my job." Taejun shook his head.
No.
"You did much more." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila file. He placed it on the silk sheets in front of her. "I did some research while you were sleeping. I wanted to know why a surgeon with your talent was driving a taxi." Monique froze. She stared at the folder. She was afraid to touch it. "Open it," he urged gently. She flipped the cover open. The first photo was of Dean Holloway. but he didn't look angry like in her dream. He looked scared. There were photos of him taking bribes from wealthy parents. There were bank statements showing he had framed Monique to give her scholarship spot to a rich donor's son. "He is finished," Taejun said, his voice cold as ice. "I sent these files to the police, the news, and the medical board. The world knows what he did to you. The corruption is handled. Your name is clean, Monique. You are free." Tears welled up in Monique's eyes. I can go back," she whispered. "I can be a doctor again?" "You can," Taejun said. "You can go back to that school. You can work in a normal hospital, deal with insurance companies, and follow their slow rules." He leaned closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "Or you can do something better." "What do you mean?" Monique asked, wiping her eyes. "I don't want to just give you money, Monique. That is too easy. I want to give you a purpose." He gestured to the luxury room, to the empire outside the window. "I have many enemies. My men get hurt and we cannot go to the police. I need someone I can trust. Someone with your skill. Someone with your blood." He held out his hand. "Be my chief medical officer. Build your own clinic. No insurance, no rules, just medicine. Be a shadow doctor for the shadow world. You saved the king. Now help me save the kingdom." Monique looked at his hand. It was the most dangerous offer in the world. And she wanted to say yes. Monique looked at the file on the bed. It was a ticket to a life she never imagined, wealth, power, and freedom from rules. But she thought about her mother working double shifts. She thought about the little girl who practiced stitching on oranges. She couldn't trade that dream for a life in the shadows. "I can't," she whispered. Her voice shook, but her eyes were steady. "I want to save people in the light, Taejun. I want to be a legitimate surgeon, not a secret." Taejun didn't get angry. He didn't argue. He stood up slowly, smoothing his suit jacket. He looked at her with a deep, quiet respect. He walked to the window and looked out at the city he owned. "The light can burn you, Monique," he warned softly. "But if that is your choice, I will not stop you. You saved my life. Your debt is paid in full." He turned back to her. "Just remember, you have golden blood. You are rare. The world might not treat you like a treasure, but I always will." He walked out the door, leaving her alone in the golden room. It felt suddenly empty. She had her freedom back, but saying no to him felt harder than she ever imagined. A few hours later, a maid brought Monique her old clothes. They were washed, folded, and smelled of lavender. Monique dressed quickly, eager to leave this strange dream world and return to reality. She found a remote on the bedside table and clicked on the TV to check the weather. Instead, she saw a breaking news banner flashing in red. "Dean Holloway of Chicago Medical University has resigned in disgrace today," the anchor announced, her face serious. Monique gasped, freezing in place. The screen showed footage of the dean hiding his face from cameras as police escorted him to a car. Evidence of massive corruption and bribery was leaked to the police early this morning, the reporter continued. In a shocking turn of events, the struggling university has already been purchased. The mysterious Lee Foundation has acquired the school, promising to modernize the hospital and review all wrongful expulsions immediately. Monique dropped the remote. It clattered loudly on the marble floor. The Lee Foundation. Taeyeon. He hadn't just cleared her name. He had bought the entire school. He wasn't just letting her go back. He was paving the road with gold, so she would never trip again. She looked out the window at the sprawling city. He was everywhere. Walking back onto the medical campus felt surreal. The last time Monique was here, security guards had dragged her out while students whispered and stared. Today, the air felt different. Leaves crunched under her boots as she walked toward the administration building, her head held high. The receptionist looked up and went pale. She scrambled to pick up the phone, her hands trembling. "Ms. Jackson is here," she whispered urgently. Within seconds, the board members came out. They didn't look at her with judgment anymore. They looked terrified. They knew who her sponsor was. They knew exactly what happened to the dean. "Welcome back, Ms. Jackson," the interim dean said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He handed her a crisp, white lab coat. "We have reinstated you with full honors. Your record is wiped clean. We are honored to have you." Monique took the coat. It felt heavy in her hands. She wasn't just a student anymore. To them, she was untouchable. She put it on and buttoned it up. She had her dream back, but as she looked at her reflection in the glass door, she knew she wasn't the same innocent girl who had left. The lecture hall was packed with students. Monique sat in the front row, taking notes on neurosurgery. She knew the answers before the professor asked them, but the classroom felt small now. After saving a Mafia boss in a getaway car with a lug wrench infusion, a textbook felt safe. Maybe too safe. When class ended, she walked out into the bright autumn sunlight. Students were laughing and talking about exams, but Monique felt separate from them. They were worried about grades. She had worried about bullets. She scanned the parking lot, looking for a yellow cab to take her home. Instead, she saw a sleek black car parked at the curb. It wasn't a taxi. It was a phantom. Taejun was standing by the door. He wasn't wearing his sunglasses. He was watching her. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He just waited. He wasn't controlling her life anymore. He was offering her a choice. He had bought the school, cleared her name, and let her go. But he had come back. Monique's heart beat faster than it had in the lecture. She walked past the other students, straight toward the man in the black suit. Monique stopped in front of him. The campus noise faded away. He opened the car door for her, a silent invitation. She didn't hesitate. She slid into the passenger seat, the seat where their lives had changed forever. Taejun got in beside her. The engine purred to life, smooth and powerful. Without thinking, Monique reached over and placed 2 fingers on his wrist.
It was a habit now.
She needed to feel the rhythm. Thump, thump, strong and steady. Taejun smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He turned his hand over and caught hers. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed the faint white scar on the inside of her elbow, the place where the needle had connected them. "Where to, doctor?" he asked softly. Monique looked at the road ahead. It was wide open.
"Just drive," she said.
They say blood is thicker than water, but in the shadow world, loyalty is the only currency that matters. Monique Jackson didn't just save a life. She claimed her throne. Remember, no matter how dark the night gets, or how impossible the odds seem, you are always the driver of your own destiny. Sometimes, the wrong turn leads you exactly where you were meant to be. If you enjoyed this ride from the rainy streets of Chicago to the throne of the underworld, smash that like button, share this video with a friend, and hit subscribe for more twisted tales of love and danger. Would you have chosen the light or the shadows? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.